Good evening and welcome to a virtual community conversation for Northwest Washington, which covers the 10th, 40th, and 42nd legislative districts. Tonight, you'll be seeing and hearing from State Senator Liz Lovelett and State Representatives Dave Paul, Deborah Lekanoff, Alex Ramel, and Sharon Shewmake. Questions have been emailed in advance and will be read here, with opportunities for more questions to be asked on the Facebook stream you are currently watching. If you would like to ask a question, please post the question in the comments and a staff member will relay the question to me to be read out loud to the lawmakers. Before we get started, I'll open it up for some brief opening remarks from your lawmakers. First, we'll hear from State Senator Liz Lovelett. Senator Lovelett has represented the 40th Legislative District since her appointment to the State Senate last year. She is the Vice Chair of the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee and sits on the Local Government Committee and Transportation Committees. Go ahead, Senator.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in tonight. Really excited to be here with my seatmates and our colleagues from the 10th and 42nd. Here to just try to answer as many questions as we can around COVID response and work that we accomplished during session. We have a great team here, and we've done a really good job of helping each other get our bills passed through the chambers and working really well together on issues around climate, education, and housing. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Senator Lovelett. Next, I'll ask Representative Deborah Lekanoff to share a few words. Representative Lekanoff came to the legislature in 2019 and also represents the 40th Legislative District. She is the Vice Chair of the House Committee on Environment and Energy and is a member of the Capital Budget Committee and the Rural Development, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Committee. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here tonight. I raise my hands in appreciation to my team, Representative Shewmake, Representative Ramel, Representative Paul, and Senator Lovelett. We have a dream team here that's been working on those hot topics that we've been addressing: environment, workforce development, sex ed, and all of those big topics that are important to us and putting people to work. I think we have a great lineup this evening, and it looks like we're going to really put together a dream team here and answer some of the questions you guys all have. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Representative Lekanoff. Next up, we have Representative Alex Ramel, who was appointed to the 40th District in the House earlier this year. He sits on the Commerce and Gaming Committee and Housing, Community Development, and Veterans Committee. Go ahead, Representative.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll just echo some of those same comments. Feel really grateful to be part of such a good team. It's really clear to me, having a few months of this job under my belt now, how important it is to be good at working with other people and have friends. And this is a great team, and I'm glad that we have a chance to showcase that this evening. And I would just add that that team includes not just those of us legislators, but also the staff that are backing us up and supporting us, Rachel and Travis, Amanda and Kaylee and Sarah and Jordan. Looking forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Representative Ramel. Next up, we have Representative Dave Paul, who has represented the 10th since 2019 and is the Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. He also serves on the College and Workforce Development Committee and Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Rachel. It's really a pleasure to be here and to join my colleagues in the northwest corner of our state. It's been truly an honor to serve for the last 2 years and listen to constituents and hear their concerns and then advocate on their behalf. I'm really proud that we've gotten a couple of bills to help veterans through the pipeline this past year. Also some work on dual credit and running start in college and high school and CTE dual credit that I'm really proud of. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening, and I hope everybody is healthy and safe. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Representative. Finally, we have Representative Sharon Shewmake of the 42nd Legislative District. Representative Shewmake is the Vice Chair of the Rural Development and Natural Resources Committee and also serves on the Environment and Energy Committee and Transportation Committee.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to be here as well. These are all the people that I carpool with back to Bellingham when we're in Olympia. I'm really good at catching rides. That's one of my events. So we had a really great session. It ended weirdly, as you all know. I did some great work on climate change and expanding access to early learning, as well as some really exciting bills on agriculture. I have been adjusting to teaching my classes online at Western Washington University, and like many other parents, am learning to homeschool. So if my kids bust through, no, that's because they're 4 and 5 and just excited to participate in democracy. And I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Representative Shewmake. We're going to go ahead and start with our first question, which was submitted online. And remember, you are allowed to ask questions in the Facebook comment section, so go ahead and ask those questions. Our first question is from Jackie. She writes, I have read the governor's plan of reopening in 5 phases. Is there a timeline connected to the phases or a basis on which we will move from one phase to the next? Also, some of the current restrictions do not seem to be on COVID-19 virus safety. For example, why is public construction allowed while private construction is not? Doesn't it make more sense to give guidelines under which businesses can operate, or set up county committees that have the authority to review and approve or disapprove requests from businesses, in which the businesses must outline what type of equipment and practices it would use in order to protect employees? Representative Shewmake, did you want to answer that?
Sure. So you might have noticed the different phases, and the reason that we can't put a set timeline is we don't know how the virus is going to behave. So we want to be able to use the best available science and the best available information on what the virus is doing and how people are responding to this threat. If we take the stay-at-home orders very seriously, then we can move through these phases relatively quickly. So each phase is 2 to 3 weeks, with the idea that that's the kind of the incubation time period. So between me getting the virus and then showing symptoms of it, that takes about 2 to 3 weeks. And so if a whole bunch of people get it and then we move to the next phase and we're opening up, then we can spread it much more quickly. We want to be careful about this. The reason this is so important is the economics are very clear on this. When we look at the impact of the 1918 flu pandemic, we saw that cities that acted soon and that acted with a steady hand saw lower economic costs, and they saw lower deaths as well. So the example that some researchers, one of whom is on the board of governors at the Federal Reserve, which is a pretty fancy economist, and someone else at MIT, also fancier than your state representative is, they saw that they looked at the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, along with many other cities. Minneapolis took an early sustained response to the pandemic. They used their own version of the stay-at-home order, and they saw 24% fewer deaths than St. Paul, which was just across the river, which acted later and for less time for their quarantine things. At the same time, they had fewer deaths. By 1919, the year afterwards, the researchers didn't see an impact of the flu pandemic on their economy. They were back to where they would have been on that trend line. So it looks like it's the public health interventions are not what's hurting the economy, it's the virus. And if we're serious about this, we can move through these stages quickly. As for the data, you can find some of that on coronavirus.wa.gov. I was pulling it up earlier. It's this really cool GIS map showing you information from the counties. You can dig down into some information about your local hospitals and what's going on. Also pay attention to your local health department for individual orders and some more local information. Why are we looking at some industries and not at others? So there's a lot of pieces to that question, and I hope I get them all right. But the general idea is that the more economic activity we have, the more people are moving around and potentially spreading it, right? So everyone has to go to the grocery store. Everyone's going to need some sort of basic accommodations, right? We want to make sure that everyone's able to do that safely. The question is, if we open up more economic activities, are people who work there also going to be traveling there? And are they going to be stopping to get more gas? Or are they going to be stopping to get a sandwich? What other accessory activities are we expecting to see? And so we want to restrict those as much as possible, while still making sure people's basic needs are met. And that includes sometimes their mental capacities, their mental needs as well. So we can beat this virus sooner rather than later. A longer period like this, or a second bump, or even a third bump, those are all worse for the economy than making sure we do it right the first time. I was speaking to someone earlier today, and it's like when you go in for surgery and you get back and you really want to go running because you're like sick of laying in bed and hurting. If you rush that, you will hurt yourself. And that's the same with this pandemic. We need to make sure that we're not rushing it.
So this is Representative Lekanoff. I was going to say that there's also, the governor has set up a really a long line of conversations that are happening with industry and with legislators and working with Department of Health, Department of Commerce, who are reaching down into the local communities. So as we start looking at the different industries opening up, we're also looking at, as Representative Shewmake said, the health impact of what that industry has to come into compliance with social distancing guidelines, and also with the sanitation and hygiene. So human health comes first, and our representative here, who sits on the governor's task force on reopening businesses and leads her expertise to that, has shared with us, with our task force at the legislative group in the Four Corners, that we need to make sure that if one industry is opening up over another industry, that we follow the health impact of what that industry is going to have in place and what guidelines are going to have put in place. So really relying upon the task force and its wingspan of working across agencies and governing levels is one of the check marks that we're using. So we're not displacing one over the other. We're actually opening up with a health lens scope first and foremost. So we're thanking Representative Shewmake for her leadership on the governor's task force.
Thank you, representatives. The next question we have is on housing, and it's from Thomas Gilmore. It says, why does Peace Health refuse to open up the old St. Luke's Hospital campus for low-cost housing? Why is Peace Health allowed to pay no property taxes on an empty building that serves no community purpose? Representative Ramel, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. My understanding on that particular building is that it's not considered safe for human habitation and would need an enormous amount of work to be brought up to standard to be used for housing. I was trying to verify this. The question came in earlier and I was trying to look it up. I wasn't able to confirm it, but my recollection from a few years ago is that they actually did work out a deal with the city, and I think they are paying property taxes there. But regardless, I think it's an important point, which is that we absolutely need more housing in our region. And so one thing that we worked on this year, and I hope to bring back and finish getting done next year, was House Bill 2649. State Representative Cindy Ryu introduced a bill that, among other things, would create an inventory for unused or underused public properties in exactly that kind of situation where it would be appropriate for housing, as a way to sort of get at this challenge of where do we put homes and how do we make them affordable for folks. Absolutely the kind of thing we ought to be thinking about.
Thank you, Representative. The next question we have is from Jessica on agriculture. It says, the agricultural industry is a huge part of the heart and soul of our Northwest region. What are you doing to protect our farmers and farm workers during the COVID-19 crisis and beyond? Representative Lekanoff, would you like to take that question?
Sure, I'd be happy to. In the past few weeks, I've been working closely with Representative Mike Stiles, the chair of the Labor Committee, and Senator Karen Kaiser, chair of the Labor Committee in the Senate side, and with Senator Rebecca Saldana. We've been engaged with our farm workers community to understand the challenges that they're facing on the agencies needing to implement their emergency order guidelines on social distancing and housing in migrant homes. It has taken a long time to get to this point. While we've been waiting for that to happen, we know that there are 3 migrant camps that have faced dangerous epidemic numbers. We are addressing that collectively through the governor's office underneath his executive leadership. We also are working as legislators to work between the governor's office, the growers, and the distillers to have sanitation products created and then distributed out to our growers to provide that to our migrant farms. The biggest challenges we're having too with our migrant farm workers is not only is it the social distancing guidelines, providing sanitation hygiene, but we also are addressing the needs for housing in these migrant farms. The emergency law order that's being created underneath the agencies is looking to make sure that these migrant workers aren't once again put in tents. In the east side, they're not put in bunk beds, which doesn't have the social distancing, nor are they put in cots, because many of these migrant farm workers will stay through November. The other challenge we're finding, and the governor sent a letter to Vice President Pence, is that we need more testing kits for essential workers, one being the migrant farm workers. Presently, by the 1st of June, we will have 25,000 H-2A workers coming into the state of Washington from Mexico, and we have a few hundred coming across the nation, all needing to be taken care of, both testing, both housing, fed, and then also if there is a healthcare situation, we need to be able to work through that. It is taking layers of government from the federal, state, and then to the legislature, both branches addressing this issue, and then also our judicial system with the court case that the migrant workers have placed upon the state of Washington. So it takes a team. We're working together, and we're trying to make sure that our essential workers who are putting food in our fridge and taking care of us are being taken care of by state members. And so thank you to the House and the Senate for collaborating with the governor's office on it. And if you need more information, please reach out to me. My team here has also been looking at it, and it's been looked at by the state legislature collectively.
Thank you, Representative. Our next question is from Carol Ramel. I think that's how you pronounce that. And it's on the economy. She says, is Washington doing anything jointly with other Western states to manufacture our own stockpile of medical supplies, so we are never dependent on federal or foreign purchasing again? And are there minimum levels of PPE now required in hospitals? And are Western states coordinating to match the efforts to match unwanted farm produce with the needs of food banks? And Senator Lovelett, would you like to take any of that?
Sure. So there's a lot of layers to that question there. So the governor's office worked to create a procurement pipeline utilizing some people from Microsoft and Amazon to get much higher volume of PPE equipment into the state. I'm not sure on the manufacturing side of things if Washington is going to kind of insulate itself from these kinds of issues by having our own supply chain, but certainly we have beefed that up tremendously in order to take care of our healthcare workers. But now, of course, the issue is as we start to reopen the economy and we have businesses like construction firms, and even just, you know, as we start to open up retail and other kinds of businesses, there's going to need to be more adequate resources around PPE and testing. So I think that it's just a matter of realizing that we kind of painted ourselves into a corner, that we business as usual in terms of what is usually the norm in hospitals, like being able to have everything be disposable. Everything is having to modify and adjust as the circumstances unfold. But the point is well taken. I mean, we saw an example of, I think it was a distillery up in Bellingham sending their equipment to San Juan Island to be producing hand sanitizer out there. So one of the incredible things that has come out of this time is just showing how communities can come together and that we can really pool our resources. And there's just such tremendous talent and knowledge and expertise out there that we have to draw upon.
Thank you, Senator. Our next question is from Derek, and it says, on May 1st, Governor Inslee released a 4-phase plan to reopen Washington's economy. It wasn't obvious how the plan deals with higher education, however. Our higher ed institutions provide a world-class educational experience for students and are major economic drivers for the state of Washington and specifically the districts you all represent. How does reopening of these institutions fit into Governor Inslee's plan, and what are you doing specifically to get them reopened safely? Representative Paul, did you want to take that question?
Great question. So I work in those institutions. My day job is at Skagit Valley College. And we've got both community colleges, we've got Western Washington University in our corner of the state. So can you hear me better now? Okay, so we have worked really hard to make sure that our students are safe, and I really appreciate what the colleges and universities have done to shift classes online and to get students to continue their education while we're dealing with this crisis in the spring quarter. I think what you are going to see is those colleges and universities working very hard, depending on the data from our health providers, to try to get classes back up in fall quarter. And taking appropriate social distancing within those classes. Many of our programs lend themselves to social distancing already. If you're thinking about a welding program or potentially some of the science laboratories. And I think those are really what we are most anxious to get back up and running because folks need that hands-on experience. But we'll be looking to work with both Western Washington University and the community colleges to help them get ready to start the fall. And I think what's really critically important is to think about if we have a second wave of the virus rebounding, how we can quickly transition to other forms of education to help get folks the education they need. So we're still teaching all those institutions, and folks are, I can tell you, very anxious to get back in the classroom, but we also want to keep students safe. We want to keep our faculty and staff safe as well. So I think we've got a really balanced approach to getting folks back on campus with that face-to-face instruction.
Thank you, Representative. Our next question is from Keith Alex, and it says, what is being done to bring reliable high-speed internet access to all of Whatcom County? Representative Lekanoff, did you want to take that one?
I'd be happy to start. We've been working and engaging on the rapid rural broadband process here to make sure that we're able to extend broadband out to our rural communities. We know that it's important for our schools to be able to have access, for our children to be able to download their curriculum. But we also know that it's important for many of our rural areas to be able to have people to have access to sign on for filing for unemployment, for healthcare and other issues. We've been collaborating with Senator Wellman, who will be engaging on it. So thank you so much, Rachel. I think also Senator Lovelett, you've also engaged on this too. Did you want to weigh in a little bit on the broadband? I know Anacortes has done some phenomenal work out there.
Yeah, and what I will say is that we had a couple of advantages moving into this in terms of being able to keep our kids in the educational setting online. One is that we do have access to reliable broadband, and our city is currently deploying fiber to the home because we were able to put it create a fiber telemetry system for our water and sewer utility, and now we're connecting fiber to the home. Additionally, we had a technology levy that passed in our school district, and that has made it so that the kids already had one-to-one access to laptops and Chromebooks and things. So for our students in Anacortes, it was very quick. Everybody got a laptop, even the kids that maybe didn't have a computer at school. So I think that just highlights and underscores the importance of those kinds of levies and making sure that kids do have access to those kinds of educational supplements as we move forward.
That's really great. And we also have Representative Mia Gregerson has been working on this issue on equality and broadband. We know that in some areas they're rolling out hotspots to local public areas like libraries, schools, city halls, and a huge hotspot where numerous people can come up and download information. So it's not the long-term answer we want, but it's a short-term answer right now. And Representative Shewmake probably knows that in Lummi Nation, I think they have 10 hotspots that they're rolling out right there on the nation, which serves about 5,000 members and has thousands of other non-tribal people living within that reservation. So it's truly a partnership at the tribal, local, and state level.
And we're seeing that rural broadband more than other. It's not just I want to get online, but it's about education. It's about business. It's about connection. This is a rural development strategy. We tried to get some money in the capital budget this last session. It didn't come through, but this is, I think there's going to be even more political will behind this coming this next session, and maybe even during the special session, to see this kind of investment in our communities, especially the rural communities where people are further away, where there's not as many opportunities, and broadband, something that could really seed some of that economic growth.
Thank you, representatives. Our next question is from Jill Bernstein, and she asks, what response, if any, should there be from the government to the loss of jobs at Alcoa?
Take that one. Those are my people, although some of them work in the 40th and the 10th as well. First of all, the people at Intelco, those families, those employees, they should know that their politicians care. Apparently the last time when there was a curtailment, it was hard to get attention from politicians. And this time we were really quick to say, we care, we want to work with you, let's figure this out. The second thing is we should know that the community cares too. The community wants to be there for those families, be there for those people, and acknowledge the hard work of the people that have been working at Alcoa. It's been in our community for over 50 years. Thirdly, we are having discussions about how to keep this plant running. They're mostly federal questions. It's about turning, the price of aluminum is really low, and when the price of what you're selling is low, it's hard to justify manufacturing it. It's hard to make that as an economics decision, as a business decision. But there are some things that we could do at the federal level, looking at the strategic importance of aluminum for national defense. And so we're working with our federal partners. We had a meeting last week with city, county, state, and federal partners discussing this. We'll be having a meeting after that. And soon we'll have these election year restrictions, so I can't pull meetings like this together. And so the mayor of Ferndale has agreed to take on that important work to continue having these discussions. There are discussions with all these local governments, but also the union representatives and members of the Alcoa management.
Thank you, Representative. Our next question is on a specific bill. It's on Senate Bill 6164, which was resentencing of rehabilitated long-term prisoners. And it's from Heather, and it asks, she says, it is the intent of the legislature to give prosecutors the discretion to petition the court to resentence an individual if the person's sentence is no longer advances the interests of justice. What are your positions regarding the fair implementation of this bill in all parts of the state? Would you encourage your legislative peers in other more conservative parts of the state to endorse this process by their prosecutors? Representative Ramel, did you want to answer that?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. So Senate Bill 6164 passed the legislature unanimously, which I think is a really good sign. I think there were a couple of folks who weren't in the building that day, but everybody who was voted for it, which means that there is really broad bipartisan support for the idea that justice. There's room for criminal justice reform, and that our sort of our history of tough on crime approach to criminal justice is becoming more and more a thing of the past, and we're trying to figure out ways to address that. In terms of the specific question there, my understanding is that that bill in particular didn't have a whole lot of people who qualify under the details there. The idea is that local prosecutors should have the authority to be able to sort of go back to a judge and say, that person who's been in prison for a very long time at this point no longer needs to be there, and it's not doing them or the public any good to keep them imprisoned. I think it's really important that as state legislators, we be kind of building those kinds of collaborative partnerships with prosecutors as we look to ways to improve our criminal justice system. So absolutely yes to sort of the idea of reaching out and working with folks on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the sort of east-west divide.
Thank you, Representative. Please remember that you are also able to ask questions on Facebook Live, so go ahead and put those into the comments. Our next question is from Spencer Lively, and it says, I'm a college student from the 40th LD. Lots of students have been struggling due to this pandemic and are worried about state financial aid that they need to keep going to school being cut or tuition rates dramatically increasing because of a recession. How do you plan to support students' ability to keep going to school? Representative Paul, would you like to take that one?
That's a great question, Spencer. So I think, first of all, I'd like to say that right now, students across the country, across our state, are getting access to help this week, perhaps as late as last week, through the CARES Act. If you have not received information from your college yet, please contact your financial aid office. And that money, half of that CARES money that went to colleges and universities, goes directly to students who are in need. And I know Western just started distributing that information to students and faculty and staff in the last couple of days. So if you have not received that, please contact your financial aid office. I think your question goes, is it bigger than that? It's thinking long-term. And first of all, the legislature passed last year and the year before the College Grant Washington program, which provides for students that are middle class, provides them a guarantee of assistance. And we're going to work very hard to protect that to make sure that folks have the ability to go to college. I think we all recognize, everybody here recognizes the importance of college education and as a workforce development tool. And if we do have a long-term economic downturn, we will see more folks going back to college. Many of them will qualify for Pell Grant as well. So you've got local Pell Grant and the Washington Grant, College Grant, to help support that. I think your concern about tuition is a really important and valid concern because we saw the legislature 10, 12 years ago in an attempt to balance their budget, they shifted more of the cost to students, allowing colleges and universities to raise tuition. I think largely folks recognized that that was too much and ended up having a negative impact on families and students. So we'll be looking for a balanced approach, making sure that students have funding through Pell and Washington Grant and through other sources of financial aid that our foundations have helped raise. I think you've got folks here, you've got two folks that work at a college or university. You've got folks that very much value it here on this phone call and in the legislature. And I think our legislature has more higher ed educators than any time of my lifetime. It's really exciting to see and folks that understand that and advocate on behalf of students and their families.
Thank you, Representative. We have a question from the Facebook chat. It says, how do we bring back critical supply chains like PPE and prescription drugs back to our state?
I'll jump in. I think that there's definitely needs to be some strategic analysis of this, right? So there were some companies that were in Maine that were producing PPE for like small hospitals during the last pandemic, the swine flu breakout. We need to, but then they closed because the hospitals were looking for the lowest buyer, and that was in China. So we need to make sure that there's maybe a few of strategic importance. Maybe we don't get all our PPE, maybe we don't get all of our supplies from U.S. firms. We can still engage in some trade, but we need to have some strategic firms in place to go ahead and create this for exactly these kinds of situations.
And I think one of the innovative ways that Washington State stepped forward was our distillers in our community were able to make the sanitation and hygiene product, your Perels of the world per se, and for our distillers to quickly move into play, have FDA provide a waiver through June, which we're extending to potentially do permanent sanitation product. Is Washington State being innovative, Washington State working at the federal level to change FDA rulings, and then bringing our distillers together with the governor's office to provide that sanitation product that's needed for all of our essential workers, from our grocery workers to our frontline workers, to our migrant workers. So Washington State, I believe, is really taking a look at what we can do to remove barriers and provide opportunities and assess the amount of supply that's really needed. So I think both for PPE and sanitation, those two answers complement one another to help you realize that Washington State is doing what it can to make sure we're better prepared in the future.
Thank you, Representatives. Now we have a question from Victoria, who asked it both in the forum and on Facebook. And her question is, I watched Face of the Nation, and they had reported that unemployment benefits will run out in several states very soon. So how true is that for Washington State, and how long until we will no longer be able to give out benefits? Representative Shewmake, would you like to?
I can take a stab. So I don't know the actual numbers for Washington State. I'm sorry, I just don't. But this is something that the federal government should absolutely be stepping up and helping us with. The unemployment system is not meant for a pandemic when we see, potentially 40% of the workforce no longer able to go to work. Even the worst recessions, you don't see 40% unemployment, right? So the state has a balanced budget amendment. We have to balance our books. So if we were to put more money into unemployment, we would either have to take that from elsewhere or increase taxes. Neither are things that we really want to do in the middle of a pandemic. The federal government can, however, because they control the money supply, they can borrow money, they can put money on the nation's credit card and continue to fund those unemployment systems, which are frankly vital right now to keeping our people housed, fed, clothed, etc., but also to maintaining the economic relationships that mean that we'll be able to bounce back for this once the virus is gone. So we need the federal government to step in and borrow money, which usually I think that we should try and live within our means. We shouldn't be borrowing money and putting money on the nation's credit card when times are well. But when times are bad, this is exactly what the federal government should be doing. They should be stepping in, they should be backfilling state and local budgets, and they should be making sure that our unemployment system is going to remain stable, because this is not the kind of unemployment that states plan for. And that's where we need this emergency assistance.
I'd just add, one of the last things we did in this legislative session was to increase the state's budget to add $25 million for the unemployment system, because it was anticipated that this was coming. I would expect that well before we reach that point, that we would hear about it, and we'd start talking about when we go back and have another legislative session, and because we cannot allow our unemployment benefits to expire right now. We absolutely can't.
Thank you, representatives. We have another question coming in from Grant on Facebook, and it says, are there any resources for students who are struggling with mental health challenges because they are so isolated right now?
So that's a very good question and a very real concern. You should contact, all of our colleges have some sort of counseling program on their campuses. They're working remotely right now. And that said, those resources, they're very much underfunded. And that's something that we've tried to work on to better support. But your counselors and advisors, at your colleges can help connect you to resources. And it's certainly, we are getting that. I'm teaching online. I'm supposed to be teaching both face-to-face and online, and now it's online this quarter. And some of my students are reporting that. And so things that we can do is we can help try to make sure that we've got more interaction, more Zoom meetings, and more Canvas chats with our students. But if you've got folks that are down and depressed, or because they're not, you need to contact student services within the college and university. And all of our counties have strong mental health services that would allow folks to call and talk to them.
So, Dave Paul, it sounds like your mic is a little funny, but I'm just going to restate. He said contact student services, and there's some great online resources at each university. And that's true for Western as well. Western has a coronavirus response page, and I'd encourage you to visit it to learn more about those resources if you're a Western student. I haven't looked, but I'm sure Whatcom and BTC have them as well.
Thank you, Representative. Our next question is from Todd, and it's about ferries. He's asked, what about the ferry replacement? The electric ferry is not due until 2023. We need to build more. The 53-year-old Yakima, currently assigned to the Anacortes San Juan Islands routes, has already had issues this year. What will happen? Senator Lovelett, would you like to take that?
Yeah, happy to jump in on that. So capitalizing the ferries has long been a constrained budget item, and especially with Initiative 976 passing, we've never had a more challenging time to draft a transportation budget. However, we're on path to start hybridizing a couple of our boats coming out of production and plans to convert several more. I believe very strongly in hybridizing the basically our entire fleet. And some of that is working on the shore power elements. So there's some design work to be done to make sure that they're plug and play, that regardless of what run the ferries are on, they have the ability to move around within the system. I think that as a part of our state highway system, we can't continue to undercapitalize them. I've been advocating for essentially an every 3 to 4 year replacement schedule so that as our more aged vessels are ready to retire, we have new vessels coming online. Many of you probably know that we had to retire the Elwha this year, which is one of the 2 vessels that are SOLAS, which is Safety of Life at Sea certified to be able to go back and forth to Canada. And now that puts it so that we don't have any redundant boats on that run, which definitely compromises that section of commerce and travel and tourism. So we're taking a really deep look on it. I've asked people within the ferries to get creative. We've looked at different ways that we can help bring in different subcontractors on the ferry production side to see if we can revitalize some of those areas of shipbuilding that have kind of been dormant over the last few years for various reasons. So I think we're on a good path forward to start with a new and improved capitalization plan. But I share your concerns about that. I do think that since the ferries are the one piece of our transportation in multimodal that we really have direct purview over greening up, that it's our responsibility to make sure that those ferries are using less diesel gas. We can save a tremendous amount of money just not having to buy diesel gas and to be able to electrify them. And especially in a state where we have access to so much renewable power, I think that's the right thing to do. So we'll continue to create that plan, and I'll be working on it through the summer. That's one of my big interim projects, is to continue the pathway to shore electrification.
So this is Representative Lekanoff, and I was happy to partner with Senator Lovelett on this. In Washington State, there are 4 county ferries. The first ferry to be electrified in Washington State is going to be the Guimas Ferry, which is again a county ferry. And we provided the beginning steps of putting in the electrical ports in Anacortes to be able to complement the work that the senator and I are doing on the state ferry system. The other 3 ferries are going to be down in Pierce, over in Eastern Washington, and then the Lummi Island ferry. These will be full electrical ferries and not hybrid ferries, which is going to be quite exciting for Washington State. Again, complementing the work that the senator did. Not only is our state ferries going to be quieter on the Salish Sea, but our county ferries are going to be quieter on the Salish Sea. So both objectives of electrifying is going to be really great for our state and in the Northwest.
And just to dovetail on that, we're also working on creating a market for marine batteries. So trying to complete all of these component parts that go into the ferries. So we have the shipbuilding side, because of course we're trying to make these in Washington. So to have those additional component parts be able to come from manufacturing that happens in Washington is a huge economic benefit, as well as providing a better final product. And was happy to just send out a letter of support for the Lummi proceeding with their ferry route as well.
Thank you, representatives. Our next question comes from Facebook. Her name's Kathy, and says, my question is, what is being done with regards to special education services? It is very hard to give services remotely, but we don't want to increase the infection rate. Any thoughts? Also, Kathy is a special education teacher.
And I understand my mic is really bad, so I will shout. So I think this is a really critical issue, and it's something that we are all grappling with. And the Education Committee, we're meeting weekly with the State Superintendent, Chris Breakdahl, and then we're meeting as a committee as well in dealing with issues that we can help address in the special session. And if we have a special session, and we can address long-term next year in the next session. And I think of everything that's going on, special education is the most critical that is not being served well with the online. As our school districts have tried very hard and worked very well, I think, to shift people to online learning. But I think the long-term lesson of this pandemic is we're going to have to address special education better, and we're going to have to be prepared to better help districts with that next fall, because we may be in a situation that schools are able to start in the fall face-to-face, but have to shift to remote education again. And we need to be able to help our school districts. We need to be able to help the state provide those must-have services to our special education children.
Thank you, Representative. Our next question is also coming from Facebook.
Rachel, if I could just add one other note there. Kathy, your experience as a special education teacher is really valuable here. I mean, I think you can tell we're all kind of grappling with how to do that. And if you have thoughts or advice on how that can be done better, please reach out. That experience is really important.
All right, thank you, representatives. Going back to Facebook, a question is, the elderly population in the 10th and 40th LDs are being hit really hard because of coronavirus. State guidelines lack protections for our elders in assisted living. Is there anything being done about this?
I can start out. So, this last session, we were able to do the first COLA adjustment, cost of living adjustment on our public retirees in quite some time. And I think that it really just highlighted how precarious the situation is for so many seniors in our communities. There's been some special looks at, property tax burden and what it does when, we've put our entire education system on people's property taxes. And when you're living on a fixed income, that's a really difficult situation to weather. The situation in long-term care centers is certainly the front line of who has been hit hardest with COVID. And I think it's just really highlighted how much work needs to be done to really protect those workers who are in that environment, because if they're protected, if they're cared for, then they are not bringing, illnesses into the facilities themselves. I've been kind of overwhelmed with how many seniors have written in about challenges that they're having. So making sure that we're capitalizing programs like Meals on Wheels. A lot of what seniors are experiencing is a lot of isolation. So this just compounds it. You're not making those trips to the grocery stores necessarily. It's harder to have those, when your senior center is closed, what kind of activities do you do? And I think that isolation is really draining over time. So I'm hoping that some of what we learn from this is how to better care for our seniors that are in our communities, how to make sure that their cost burden isn't too high with the amount of Social Security they're getting or with whatever their retirement accounts are, and that we figure out how to reduce some of that burden on their property taxes.
Thank you, Senator. Our next question comes from Scott, and he asks, how can local manufacturers make a difference locally? What's the most pressing need? Is it still PPE or better to hire more hourly earners? What can we do?
If you're interested in making PPE, the coronavirus.wa.gov website has a call from the Department of Commerce where you can connect with the people that would be the purchasers of this. I recently was talking to someone at a nursing home and they said they don't have enough gowns right now. So this is something that changes rapidly, and I would really encourage you to reach out to the Department of Commerce and see what they need right now. Thank you, by the way, for offering to do that and thinking of the community.
Thank you, Representative. Our next question is coming from Facebook, and it says, how can the state support cities in making public street space available for people while we social distance?
I feel like I know who wrote that question. I think that's a great idea. I think it's something that the city should really be looking at. It's a super, super local decision. I wouldn't want to override my local partners in something along those lines. And so I think it's something that we should be writing our city council people about, and probably on particular streets.
And I think we have to remember too, that's a really good point, Representative Shewmake, that it's a local conversation, a local decision, and we really shouldn't be out on the streets as is. It's still stay home, stay safe as much as possible. I think remembering also, not only do you need to respect your social distancing, but remember to have your face cover if you can, and realize that your health is important, but the person you're walking past is also important. So not only do you need I don't think you so much need enforcement on the streets for social distancing, but just actually you as a person and you as a citizen, remember your space, and remember when you're going out in public to think about someone else that could potentially take it home and infect them. So it's a little bit of a using your own regulation on how to be out in public smartly.
Thank you, representatives. Our next question, and we've gotten several that are along this vein, is from Kennedy, and it says, I'm a student at Western Washington University, and due to COVID-19, I've lost my main source of income. I do not qualify for the stimulus check, and I do not qualify for unemployment benefits. How do you all plan to support college students during this time, many of whom are in the same predicament I am?
Dave, you're on mute.
So, Kennedy, that's a great question. And again, the CARES Act money from the federal government, half of that went to college and universities goes to students. And there's been a little bit of a lag getting that to students, but your college or university should be sending you an email if they haven't already in the last day or two. At Western and at Skagit, the two schools I'm most familiar with, both have short application processes. It is a very easy application. I looked at Western's today. I looked at Skagit's last week. And it's specifically designed to help students like yourself who you're absolutely right and have a right to be frustrated because you were left out of, if you were dependent of your parents, you didn't get a stimulus check. And in many cases, folks are paying rent in an apartment that they don't need because their classes are all online, they could go home. So you're absolutely right to be frustrated, but both Western and Skagit and Whatcom now have that money being dispersed by their financial aid departments. So please contact them. And again, at Skagit and Western, at least, it's a very short application process.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Representative Paul.
Oh,
If I
go
can,
ahead.
two other quick notes on that question. One, it sounds like in that particular situation, it sounds like you may have applied for unemployment insurance, and would just encourage you to double check. There was the original state unemployment insurance excluded a lot of people who later qualify under the expanded COVID unemployment insurance. My son is a student at Bellingham Technical College, and he falls into exactly that category. Didn't qualify, reapplied, now qualifies. So would encourage you to double check. You may qualify for that benefit, and we certainly make sure you get it. And then the other thing I think we really need to look at is rental assistance. So the eviction moratorium is an important step to make sure that people aren't losing their housing. But if what that means is folks in those kinds of situations are just falling further and further behind, and their landlord can't kick them out, but they're they're going to have to pay for next month's rent and last month's rent, and they still haven't got a paycheck. We have to make sure that we're starting to look for ways to support folks like that, and I think rental assistance needs to be the equation.
Thank you, representatives. And we have another question. This is from Shelby. It says, with meat processing facilities seeing outbreaks and threatening our food supplies, are you open to allowing more local options for farmers engaged in pork and beef production?
Yeah, so we had a bill that came through this last session. It ended up not making it over the finish line. There was some money put in a proviso, and it was basically to reach out and do some marketing to local farmers who are engaging in especially pork and beef, like Shelby mentioned. This is something that we've been hearing from our rural farmers here in Whatcom County, people who are doing innovative stuff on grass-fed, pasture-raised beef, mostly small farm operations that are having to ship their animals pretty far away, which stresses out the animal. It means that they can't create kind of cool local products and partnerships. And I'd like to see that happen. So I've been in some discussions with a representative from Eastern Washington. A lot of this is the state working with the federal USDA. And so we've been working about these partnerships and trying to figure out what we can do to assist these small local farmers that are doing just really cool stuff from the ag side, be able to reach out to their local customers that are dying to buy this product. And I think this is a really exciting way to work in one of those win-win situations that you get to do good work and help people out. And hopefully we've seen that relying on kind of the old ways of doing things, maybe some local farming as well could be part of that mix.
I wanted to add that our local farmers market in Anacortes just started up this last weekend. A lot of farmers markets are going to be going through the rest of the season. And I think there's been some really interesting and innovative programs that have come out of, strangely, the ports. Port of Skagit does some really interesting incubation for ag, not specifically on the meat production side of things, but I think people are really valuing their local food systems more and more over time as we're seeing how distressing to the planet huge agricultural institutions, what that is costing us over time. But again, let's bring it back to the people who are frontline workers in here, the farm workers and the people who are in these kinds of facilities. They're having outbreaks in their facilities, and we have to do much better by them to make sure that they're not that they're able to have safe work conditions.
Thank you, representatives. Our next question is from Todd, and he says, I'm worried about Tim Iman's I-976 car tab initiative and the negative impact on our state transportation budget. What are our elected officials doing to make sure our transportation and infrastructure system is well funded to meet our 21st century demands in terms of electric vehicles, transit, and ferries?
Okay, well, I'll start out. So when we crafted at least on the Senate side, and I think there was a kind of a corollary on the House side, when we crafted our budgets last time, there was a real emphasis on having it be, it was a rather anemic budget. We wanted to make sure that we weren't having to strip things out if or when Initiative 976 passes. It's still going through the courts, so it remains to be seen how that is all going to shake down. We know that we had a lot of projects that were initially put on pause that were hanging in the balance that I think are now getting up and running again. But I think it just underscores how incredibly important multimodal transportation is. I'm hoping that we're getting to a place where the one person, one car mode of travel is going to start phasing out because we're making these big investments. The light rail that's expanding all the way up the I-5 corridor is moving along, and we have to just keep extending it so we can get it hopefully up to Bellingham, up to the border. I mean, we've got to figure out how to get that tuned up. And same thing with our ferries. You know, I was mentioning earlier about making sure that those boats are getting capitalized so that we're not throwing tons of money into the deferred maintenance that then makes them more expensive to maintain over time. So I think that the budgets were crafted with this in mind as they went out of the gate, and that we're going to have to continue to figure out how and where to make those kinds of cuts. But one of the things that I'm kind of hopeful about coming out of this time of COVID response is we're telecommuting more. We're finding ways for people to work from home. We're finding ways to have our meetings from home. And I think if our workforce from here on out is able to spend 10, 20, 30% of their time working from home, that's 10, 20, 30% of the cars off the road that are exacerbating our traffic issues. So I'm hopeful that we have some positive takeaways during this period of time, but it's going to remain to be seen how deeply 976 impacts the budget on the long run.
Can I add to that? So I think we also need to move away from endless expansions of lanes in the Seattle-Tacoma corridor and look at look at programs in areas like in Whatcom County. We have a lot of places that are frankly unsafe right now. So we have, because of the federal government, we have the train going through Blaine, and we have this train crossing that you can sometimes get stuck behind for 45 minutes or more. Right? Heaven forbid someone is sick and needs to go to the hospital during that time. So I'd like to see investments away from endless highway expansions in the parts of the state where the land is the most expensive, and they frankly can use buses there because they have that density, and movements towards places where we're talking about real human health and safety issues. The other thing that we have is Slater Road. When it floods, it traps everyone out on Lummi Island. It traps everyone out on the Lummi Reservation. it traps people going to the refineries, and it backs up Ferndale for 2 to 3 hours, right? That's not normal traffic of everyone leaving at 5 p.m. That's because we have a fault in our infrastructure right now. And I'm sure Whatcom Island and San Juan counties can have similar stories along these ways too, where there's parts of these roads that are unsafe. And so we need to have a change in priorities. We need to, instead of looking at one part of the Seattle area, the Seattle-Tacoma megalopolis that has some congestion because they haven't managed their transit well, we need to make sure that we're funding things where people are actually unsafe. And these choke points in rural areas, that's a really big deal right now.
Thank you both. Unfortunately, we are about out of time, and that is our last question. Thank you to everyone who participated in this virtual town hall. I'm going to turn it back over to the legislators for some closing remarks. Senator Lovelett, would you like to go first?
All right. Well, thank you guys again for participating. And remember that our offices are open, all day, every day. You can email any time of day or night. You can call during normal business hours, but we all have tremendous staff people that are here answering these questions, and they're here to help connect you to resources and make sure that you're getting the answers that you need, and that when we need to be advocates for you in the community, that we know what we're advocating for. And we've done a whole lot of town halls so far. I'm excited to be able to share this space with Rep. Shewmake and Paul, because we really do make a team effort to answer the needs of our communities and constituencies. So keep sending that information to us. We really value it, and it really helps influence our decisions and how we best represent our communities. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Lekanoff, would you like to give some closing remarks?
Thank you. I'll be quick as it's late in the evening. We really appreciate our colleagues, our Representative Paul, Representative Shewmake, for joining us. I can't say as much as Liz has said. The five of us here are a great team, and our wingspan stretches far and wide, from the north to the south. It's been an incredibly challenging time for all of us. I want to thank each and every one of you for remembering to take care of yourself, take care of your neighbor, take care of your elder. To those who are teaching at home, to your children becoming teachers, thank you for the work that you're doing. To our essential workers, we could not do this without all of you. Thank you to our grocery store workers. Appreciation for our nurses and our doctors. To our bus drivers who are still out there driving our buses. Thank you, Liz Lovelett, for working with the bus drivers up here in the North End. I heard great things about the work you're doing. To our environmental community, it is so nice to feel Mother Earth take a breath. I look forward to working with my colleagues to be able to take what we've learned here during this time and work on important topics such as green infrastructure, working on a green farm bill with Representative Shewmake, taking a look at how we better address building the future for generations to come. So I raise my hands to all of you, and please stay home, be safe, and have a good, wonderful rest of your evening and week.
Representative Ramel.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for tuning in this evening. I hope you started to get a sense of sort of the priorities that we're making. In this time, we're looking at how we can recover from this pandemic, from this crisis. And I hope you see that our approach to that is really one that's doing everything we can to put people first. That means that our first priority in this is public health. It means we're all committed to making sure that the folks who are essential workers are really treated like the essential people that we know that they are. It means that we're very committed to making sure that folks aren't losing their housing in this crisis, and that we're supporting small businesses. When we sort of emerge on the other end of this, hopefully soon, you can anticipate that our priorities are going to be those same things, and we're going to be looking to make big investments to restart our economy, investments in things like housing and clean energy infrastructure. Thanks for all of your attention, and look forward to continuing to engage with you in many other forms. Thanks.
Representative Paul, would you like to give some closing remarks as well?
Thank you, Rachel. So thanks everybody for joining us this evening. I know you've got lots of options, which you could spend an hour doing with your time. And thank you so much for taking that time to join us. And I want to thank my colleagues for letting me join them. It is really an honor to serve and to work with folks across our 4 counties and our counties. As I'm listening to the questions, the issues stretch across all 4 counties, and we're all facing similar challenges. I'm really impressed with the investments we've tried to make in public health and education and transportation to help better serve our communities. So we're looking at how to best serve you in the short term and in the long term and make those investments in our community. And it's such an honor to serve with my colleagues and do that. Please continue to email us with questions or ideas. My 2 veteran bills that I worked on this past session were both, actually all 3 bills that I had on veterans were suggested by constituents, and then work through that process to help make those laws. And our constituents are our best source of ideas. So thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great evening. I look forward to seeing you soon face to face when we get that opportunity next.
Thank you, Representative Paul. Finally, Representative Shewmake, would you like to give some closing remarks?
Yes, thanks everyone for coming out tonight, or staying in tonight, I guess. I think you saw one of the things that happens here is that we all really work together in Olympia. So we kind of trade off issues, and there's things that I don't know everything about, but I turn to Dave Paul because he's right next to me on my Zoom screen for education, and I turn to Senator Lovelett when it's a question about ferries, right? And so it's that working together, it's these many minds knowing a little bit of things that I think is really part of the magic of the legislature. As you go ahead, I know it's really hard. I got a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they are desperate to see their friends and go to circle time at school. And it's hard to walk by a playground. I try to not walk by them right now so they won't be tempted. But honestly, the better we do at the social distancing, the sooner we are out of this. This is not something that can be rushed by time, but good behavior can get us out sooner. One of the things I am looking at is how can we open up things safely? So if you have a small business, or if you're part of an organization that you think you could transition to something safer that's shut down and it's not part of the governor's 4-part plan, it's not laid out there, please contact my office. We want to know about this. And then finally, I'd like to thank you all for the work that you've done already in staying safe. We're doing a lot better than other states are, considering we had the first case, and I am personally really proud of that. Something I saw on Twitter the other day that really made me kind of like laugh, but also feel good on the inside was a talk about, like, we see this apocalyptic fiction like Mad Max. We think we're all going to have like crazy hair and be fighting against each other. Instead, we all have like poor hair that we cut ourselves, and we're sewing each other masks and bringing each other food. Right? Like, we're filling up these little food pantries. So I'm going to be looking at sci-fi a little bit differently now. I'm going to be like, where are the nice people? And I think that's because of our community and who we are and who we've always been. And this crisis has just shown more of that. So thank you for sitting and listening to us on a Monday night. And I hope to continue this conversation. And
thank you, everyone, to joining for us tonight. Reach out to member offices via the emails in the chats being posted right now, and have a great night. Thank you, everyone.